Hello, and welcome back to Talk Tech with Toby. I'm, of course, Toby. What I wanted to talk to you today was the basics of networking. I have a lot of people that are either trying to get into the tech field or even that have been in the tech field and don't really quite understand how networking works. Basically, and what I mean by that is when your computer reaches out to the internet and does something and brings it back, how is that all set up and how does it work and how can you configure that and change things? Now, the basic overall scheme of networking is a very, very complicated thing, and it's going to take a long time to understand, but this is going to be an introduction to it, and in later videos I'm going to create a series that's going to explain some of the more advanced options and what you can and cannot do. So basically, to explain how the internet works, you have what people call today the cloud, and basically that's nothing more than just a buzzword. If you think of the internet being anything that's not inside of your house or business, that is the cloud, the internet cloud. Okay, so basically the way that this works is there's something called IP addresses, you probably heard the term before, that are handed out to every device across the entire internet. And when you go to either, something like Time Warner Cable, Huawei, AT&T, or whatever, and you buy a internet package, you are buying an internet package that is probably starting off somewhere around 3 down and 1 up megabits per second. Okay, that's just a starting level. And with that, you get a modem. Okay, and your modem connects to usually a cable line or a phone line or something like that. And then out of that comes an Ethernet cable. This right here is just a basic networking cable, and that's what connects everything together. Okay, so once you have your modem set up, you have what's called a public IP address, and that's an IP address that's handed out to every device across the internet. Now, normally, those IP addresses skip and whatnot, and that's called a dynamic IP address as opposed to a static IP address, but I'll talk about all that in later videos. Now, basically, to understand how your computer connects to the internet, you got to know the basic pieces of it. So, I mentioned the modem. When you connect your modem to the line, it reaches out to, let's just say Time Warner Cable. It goes through a coaxial cable over to some servers that Time Warner Cable host and then delegate and whatnot, and that produces your public IP address. So you have the entire internet cloud. Let's just say it's a giant circle right here. Okay, and inside of that are all the public IP addresses of all the devices on the internet. You get one of those IP addresses. Now, if you wanted to sit there and put a IP address onto each device on the network, that would cost you a lot of money, and there's only a certain amount of IP addresses that you can actually use throughout the world. So basically, what we use is something called port address translation, network address translation, so that you can have your internal IP addresses linked to your external IP address. And since you only get one, and you probably have multiple devices in your house, I think I have somewhere around 10 altogether, whether it's a phone, a computer, a laptop, an iPhone. It doesn't even matter what it is, truthfully. Even your router itself gets its own IP address. So basically what happens is you get the one IP address that goes to your modem, and that's going to go and connect to something like this. This right here is just a basic wireless G router. This particular one is made by Linksys. And the way that it works is you have your networking cable that comes out of the back of your modem, and that's going to plug into the back here into your WAN port. Okay, now normally a WAN port is separated from the internal switch that's built into it with these extra 4 right here, and what WAN stands for is Wide Area Network. That's basically the internet cloud. So that particular port connects to your internet cloud, and this particular port right here is assigned your external IP address. Now, to understand a home router, you have to understand what it does. These things normally do 4 or 5 different things. Now, normally people just think, oh, well, these just, push out wireless. They do so much more than that, okay? Basically, these things right here take your external IP address and serve multiple internal IP addresses on a switch here and also through your wireless. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go over to my whiteboard here and show you kind of what I'm talking about and give you an overall picture of what I'm talking about. So basically, we are going to put a couple different things down here that I talked about before. Remember, I talked about the internet cloud. Okay, this is the internet cloud, and inside of here are all the external IP addresses. Now, when you buy an internet connection from, let's say, Time Warner Cable, they're going to make that connection for you, and then you get your modem. Okay, and your modem reaches out to the cloud here and actually picks up an external IP address for you. Now, you've also probably went out to Walmart or Sam's Club or wherever you went, Micro Center, it doesn't really matter, and you've bought a router, okay? Remember that router I showed you earlier, and it had 2 little antennas coming off of it and whatnot, and then it had the 4 ports on the back that I call a switch? That's this right here. And this right here, that's your WAN port, your wide area network, which connects directly up here to your modem. So, your modem serves the internet to your router, and you get the external IP address from Time Warner Cable that's now loaded into the WAN port here on your router. So, let's say you have a desktop here, and you have a phone, and let's say a laptop, okay? The phone and the laptop are done wirelessly through your wireless antennas here, okay? And then these two actually come over here to your switch and give you hardwire connections. Now your router has its own internal IP address, and usually directly from the factory, that's 192.168.2.1 or .1.1. Okay, so that's your router's IP address, and you can actually go into that and configure your wireless settings and all your other stuff and whatnot. So each device on the network has to have its own internal IP address, and normally it's going to start with 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5. You see, so on and sundry. So basically, those are all your internal IP addresses. So this one would be 192.168.2.2. This would be 192.168.2.3, .2.4, .2.5. You see the idea. And how that's all actually allocated and distributed, I can talk about later videos. This is just a basic overall scheme of how things work. So let's say 192.168.2.3 here, this particular one that we're working with, it's a hardwire connection. So it has to reach out to the internet and get to YouTube, okay? YouTube is out here on the internet cloud. So 192.168.2.3 doesn't have an external IP address because you don't want to buy 5 external IP addresses, and we actually have a shortage going on with them throughout the world, but that's a different story for a different video. So 192.168.2.3 here reaches out through this connection into your router. And your router says, okay, we have an external IP address of whatever it is, and those change from day to day. They can either be dynamic or static, and I'll talk about that in later videos. So your router hands that traffic up to your modem here, okay? And basically, your modem reaches out to the internet, grabs the video that you're going to be watching on YouTube, brings it back to the modem, back to the router, and your router already has that traffic tagged for the internal IP address of 192.168.2.3. So it can send that traffic back to the correct computer. And you can do this with all your devices at the same time. That's what a router does. A router serves multiple internal IP addresses, all these ones that we have right here, whether they're wireless or hardwired, to an external IP address so that you can get over here onto the cloud. So, what I have showed you today is a very basic overall understanding of how a network works in a home or a small office. Now, you can obviously build things and connect more connections and whatnot through one of these. This right here is called a switch. Now, remember I mentioned earlier, this thing has a switch built into it. This is your wireless router. If you look at these 4 ports right here, this is an internal switch for hardwire connections. Now, you can actually take one of these and connect one of these ports right here to this, and you can set up all these hardwire connections into this router as well, and it'll all be served internet and whatnot. And basically all you have to do is just take one of these networking cables again that I showed you earlier, connect it to one of these ports on this, and connect it to one of these ports on here. All a switch does is connect all these together. Now, whatever a switch is connected to, it also connects together. So if you connect 2 switches together, all these ports now become on, they're all served by the same router, if you will. And that's a very simple rundown of how that sort of stuff works. In my next video, I'm going to talk about wireless networks, because that's something you deal with a lot in either a home setting or a small office. I'm going to show you how wireless networks work, the basics in and outs of how wireless networks work, and how you can configure your wireless networks to not only be secure, but personalize them as well, and even if you need to, hide them. Well, that was Talk Tech with Toby. As always, I hope you guys got a lot of information out of my video. If you ever have any questions or requests for a video, or even want a product review done, leave it in the comments, or you can go ahead and message me directly and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.